Welcome to the Inner Light Companion, a space to personalize your spiritual journey with the 12 sacred intimacies. I'm Tamara Ridge, your companion and guide. Each episode of this podcast explores a facet of connection with the divine, yourself, others, and the world, offering clear markers to recognize, gentle practices to try, and stories that help you grow what's strong and tend to what needs to grow. Move at your pace and use the name for the holy that fits your heart. This isn't therapy or advice. It's a meeting of souls, a place to listen deeply, ask real questions, and remember the wisdom already within you. I invite you now to take a breath. Let's begin. Before we begin, this episode contains stories of spiritual abuse, domestic abuse, and the profound loneliness that comes when everyone you trusted abandons you for choosing freedom. If you've lost your entire community for leaving, if you've stayed too long because you couldn't bear the isolation, you're not alone. I lived it. And I'm here to tell you there is a path through. I want to tell you about a moment that changed my life. It was before I left Mormonism. I was standing in my living room, about to make the choice to leave the church, and I did what any rational person does when they're about to blow up their entire life. I stood there weighing the cost. If I left, I'd lose my social supports. If I ever needed any monetary support, food support, any of that, that's gone. A sense of community, gone. I risked losing my lifelong friendships, maybe even my family relationships because they would become strained, maybe destroyed when I jumped off into what they thought was outer darkness. And I stood there and asked myself, can I do this? The answer that came wasn't yes. It wasn't even, I think so. My answer was, I can't not. I couldn't not leave. The cost of staying was higher than the cost of losing everyone and everything I knew. But here's what I didn't understand then. Standing in that living room, I was about to experience the exact same isolation I'd escaped in my first abusive marriage. Only this time it wouldn't be one man controlling my relationships. It would be an entire religious system that had trained everyone I loved to abandon me the moment I chose freedom. In my first marriage, isolation was his most effective tool. He controlled who I saw, who I could trust. He convinced me that people that I loved didn't love me. He convinced me that connection outside of his approval was dangerous, that friends who questioned him were threats, that because he couldn't see his family, because they were living one state away, I shouldn't see mine. That family, anyone who would maybe support my independence, those were enemies. When I finally left that marriage after 14 years, most of my relationships were already gone. He'd dismantled my support system piece by piece, so that when I needed people most, there was no one left. That's what abusers do. They isolate you because isolated people can't leave. Years later, after leaving the church, I realized something that took my breath away. I'd experienced the exact same isolation by design. People who were lifelong friends vanished overnight, and it wasn't because they weren't my friends or didn't love me. It's because the fear instilled in them of being friends with someone who they loved, I thought, but who made a choice to become an apostate was too dangerous for them. My family ties became strained to breaking. I actually lost all of my family relationships within about 10 years of leaving the church. The community I'd built my entire life since I was 12 lost in an instant. And just like my abusive marriage, this wasn't accidental. It was a control method. The church doesn't call it isolation. They call it protecting the faithful, protecting your testimony. They call it choosing the right. They call it protecting your eternal family. But the mechanism is identical. Control who you associate with, and you control whether you can leave. Let me be specific about how this works, because it's so normalized in Mormon culture that most members don't even see it while they're living it. The first thing is discouraging relationships with non-members or dangerous people unless you're making missionary efforts. You're taught from childhood that non-members are other. They're different. They're worldly. They're less spiritually enlightened. You can be kind to them. You can be a missionary to them. But don't build your life around them. Why? Because people outside of the system might ask questions that the church doesn't want you asking. They might validate your doubts. They might tell you it's okay to leave. Abusers do the same thing. They isolate you from anyone who might help you see the truth. The other thing to think about is that your family bonds are threatened. They're only eternal. Your family's only eternal if you're compliant. It's really interesting. After I left the church, I was really contemplating, because I have a grandmother who I have quite a lot of love for. And before I left the church, I really took a lot of comfort in the idea that I might meet her again as part of the eternal family. And I was with my third husband, and we had just left church while I was exploring, trying to reconstruct my faith. And I said, I remember we were driving on the freeway home from church, and I'm looking out the window, thinking about my grandmother and realizing that I don't believe the concept of eternal marriage anymore. So I look at my husband at the time and said, "What happens to my grandmother?" And he, not recognizing the weight of the moment, which was often true for him, said, "Hellfire?" Which response caused me to just break out into instantaneous sobbing. But it really does bring the message home. The doctrine of eternal families is beautiful until you realize how conditional it really is. Your family is only eternal if everyone stays Mormon, if everyone stays temple worthy, if everyone obeys. So my ex-husband's joke about hellfire may not have been true about my grandmother and the Mormon beliefs, but certainly I wouldn't have met her again because I put myself in outer darkness for not obeying. The moment that you leave the church, you've broken the eternal seal. You're the one who destroyed the family. My family even believes this. My sister left the church after I did, and it's my fault. You're the reason your children won't be with you in the celestial kingdom. That is not theology. That's emotional hostage taking. And it's not based on true principles. The next part is shunning, excommunication, and social ostracism. When you leave, the church doesn't have to tell people to shun you. The culture does it automatically. Suddenly you realize that people who you thought were close friends are now looking at you as a service project. They'll drop off cookies, love bomb you at your front door, because now you are something they have to serve to try to save you. And that sort of mechanized relationship interaction doesn't feel honest. It doesn't feel safe. People you've known for 20 years avoid talking to you. Why? Because association with you is spiritually dangerous. You're apostate. You're lost. And faithful members are taught to protect themselves from your influence. They also make you choose between authentic relationship and organizational loyalty. I just touched on that a little bit, but here's the core abuse. You can have your relationships, or you can have authenticity, but not both. If you want to keep your community, you have to stay silent about your doubts. You have to perform belief you don't feel. You have to betray yourself to keep connection. That's not love. That's control. And when you finally choose authenticity, when you finally say, I can't not leave, everyone goes away. So let me tell you what that isolation cost me. After I left the church, I experienced a loneliness that was so deep. I don't know if I have words for it, actually. Everyone was gone, not just church friends. Everyone. I noticed also that being a woman who is divorced in the church feels dangerous. So I'd already lost people because of divorce. And now getting to the place where I'm choosing to be more authentic in my voice. People that I trusted, that I'd served with, that I built my life around for decades, they were all gone. Unless, of course, we count love bombing cookies on my porch. But it almost felt like if they stayed on my porch too long, they'd be afraid that the apostasy bug would get them too. In that loneliness, I made a choice I'm still healing from. I chose my third abusive husband instead of embracing my sovereignty. Why? Because I couldn't bear the isolation. Because I'd been taught my entire life that connection was more important than freedom, that belonging was worth any cost. So I chose an abusive relationship over being alone. I didn't really embrace my sovereignty, my true freedom to choose connection on my terms until about 10 years later. 10 years of living with another controlling relationship because the loneliness of leaving the church was unbearable for me. That's what isolation does. It makes you stay in harm longer because you can't face losing everyone again. I remember I stayed in that marriage because his daughter had a baby. And I wanted to stay connected and be a grandma and do all of the things. Letting go took me an extra year after that baby was born. And here's another story that still breaks my heart when I think about these dynamics of being true to yourself or being true to the organization. After I left, a longtime friend, someone that I'd known since I was 12, she was one of the young women's leaders when I was growing up. So she knew me from the time I was 12 until now I left the church. I was 43 years old. So it's someone that I trusted and loved and looked up to. After I left, she decided that she was going to help with my developmentally delayed daughter. She was 16 at the time, and I was working to rebuild my life, even just part-time. But this friend offered to have my daughter at her home during the day while I was at work. I was so grateful for that. And I thought, at least someone still cares. At least there's someone that's still here. And she'd been around in my life for so long, I never, ever doubted it. Until my daughter told me what was really happening. This woman was making my daughter sit down and read the Book of Mormon in her home. Not asking, not inviting, making. Using my daughter's developmental delays, using my gratitude, using my desperation for help to try to reconvert my child behind my back. And when I set the boundary, when I said, you cannot do that, do you know what she said? You can probably guess. That is your choice. And she shunned me. Take a second. Let that sink in. A lifetime friend used my vulnerable daughter as a missionary target. And when I protected my child, because my daughter didn't want to have anything to do with the church, I was the one who lost the relationship and blamed because, quote, that's your choice. That's not friendship. That's spiritual warfare disguised as care. And here's what the church trains members to believe. If everyone leaves you, you must be the problem. Not the system that demands compliance, not the doctrine that weaponizes relationships, not the culture that shuns anyone who chooses freedom. You're the problem. That internalization, that belief that I must be so broken, so wrong that everyone left, is one of the deepest wounds of religious trauma. But it's not true. You're not the problem. The system that taught people to abandon you is the problem. So, how do you heal from this? How do you reclaim your right to connection after an entire system trained everyone you loved to abandon you? It's so painful. Here are the practices that saved my life. First, grieve the real losses. Don't minimize it. This is the first and most important step. Let yourself grieve. You didn't just lose church friends. You lost decades of relationships. You lost people you served with, raised kids with, built your life around. That loss is real. It's devastating, and you don't have to minimize it to heal from it. So I want you to open your journal. Make a voice note right now if you don't have your journal near you. But write this question. Who did I lose when I left? What did those relationships mean to me? Write their names. Write what you miss. Let yourself feel the full weight of what you lost, because you cannot heal what you won't name. Second, release the fantasy of unconditional love from conditional systems. Here's the hard truth. The love you thought you had was conditional all along. Real love doesn't require compliance. Real love doesn't vanish when you change. Real love doesn't demand that you betray yourself to keep the connection. The church calls it eternal love, but it's only eternal if you obey. That's not love. That's a contract. And releasing the fantasy that those relationships were ever unconditional is part of your healing. It doesn't mean those people didn't care about you. It means they cared about the version of you that stayed Mormon more than they cared about the real you. Because the real you confronts them with fears and truths and reality. And in my opinion, people who stay Mormon are too scared to face that. And you deserve better than that. Number 3, build a new community. Start with one safe relationship. You don't have to rebuild your entire community overnight. Think about how long it took to get to the point where you had all of those losses. Just start with one safe relationship. One person who sees you. One person who doesn't need you to perform belief to stay connected. One person who honors your freedom. That could be a therapist who specializes in religious trauma, or a spiritual counselor, an online post-Mormon community, a friend from childhood who never joined the church, a partner who loves you as you are. One safe relationship is enough to start, because that one relationship reminds you connection is possible. You are not unlovable. You can be fully yourself and still be wanted. Fourth, set boundaries with the people who are still in your life. Some relationships will survive your leaving. Some family members will stay. Some friends will choose you over the church. But you get to set the terms for those relationships now. You get to decide what topics are off limits. For example, your testimony, your eternal salvation, and your temple worthiness. You get to decide how much emotional labor you're willing to do instead of explaining, defending, or performing. You get to decide what access people have to you and your children. And your boundaries, they're not mean. Many people are taught in the church that saying no is mean. It's not. Your boundaries are sacred. Anyone who can't honor them isn't safe for this season of your life. Fifth, use this daily affirmation. I am worthy of relationships that honor my freedom. I am worthy of relationships that honor my freedom. Say that every day. I am worthy of relationships that honor my freedom, not relationships that demand compliance, not relationships that require silence, not relationships that cost you your authenticity. You are worthy of connection that does not require your self-betrayal. Say it until you believe it. Here's what I know now, 16 years after standing in that living room. True belonging requires freedom, not coerced compliance. The divine doesn't demand you sacrifice your freedom to keep love. God doesn't say you can only have connection if you stay in systems that harm you. The God I know now, the God I met in my meditation practice 10 years after leaving, the God who said, I've held you all along, that God has never required me to abandon myself to belong. You are worthy of connection that does not require your silence. You are worthy of relationships that honor your growth. You are worthy of spiritual family built on truth, not terms. And if the people you thought were your family can't hold space for your freedom, they were never your people. You're finding your people now. Leaving shouldn't mean losing everyone, but in systems designed to control through isolation, it often does. And if you're in that profound loneliness right now, if you're wondering if you'll ever have connection again, if you'll ever find your people, I want you to hear this. You will. It won't look like what you lost. It will be smaller at first. It'll be unfamiliar. It'll require you to trust in ways you've never had to trust before. But you will find your people. The ones who love you for your freedom, not for compliance. The ones who celebrate your growth, not your obedience. The ones who see you, really see you, and say, welcome. You belong here, exactly as you are. That's the spiritual family you're building now. And it's worth every loss you had to endure to find it. You're not too broken to be loved. You're not too free to belong. You're exactly where you need to be. Welcome home to yourself. Thanks for listening. As you step into your day, notice which intimacies stirred for you, and then choose one small practice and let it meet you where you are. You want support? Grab the free Sacred Intimacy Snapshot, and when you're ready, the full Sacred Intimacy Assessment that can guide your next steps. Links are in the show notes. Until next time, walk gently, listen deeply, and trust the light within.